Well, welcome everyone. Today I'm excited to announce that we have with us a falling board, but also Jim Moore. He has been an independent political analyst in the Portland area since I graduated high school in 1990, just to make you feel good. Moore is currently the elections analyst for KATU television and the political analyst for KXL 101 FM radio in Portland. In addition, he is a great guy and a regular source for a number of regional newspapers and several national media enterprises. Moore teaches politics at Pacific University in Forest Grove, where he is the political outreach director of the Tom McCall Center for Civic Engagement. Please welcome Jim.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
Let me get my timer here. Otherwise, because I'm a professor, we will talk forever and ever and ever. So we had primary election. It was exciting. If you're in Clackamas County, it's still exciting. Tomorrow I'm talking, actually their first time, a group of women Democrats. I talked to the women Republicans in Lake Oswego as well, but these are the women Democrats. It'll be their first in-person meeting in over 2 years. And they have wanted to go after the county clerk down there for a long time. They think they might actually be able to get her this time. So with the election, I'm going to do a little bit of what the election was and then looking ahead, where we stand now as we're moving forward and looking at things. And so to do that, let's start with Washington County, because Washington County races, usually there's one or two. Our county commission is quite amusing in who runs against who. This time the county commission seats, not much, but the chair's race, well, that was interesting. So we had that. We had the DA's race, which I don't know about you, but that was the one that was the #1 source of mailers at my house. I was getting stuff from both of them. It was amazing, and sometimes several a day. And then, of course, who knew the county auditor would, of course, be an interesting race. And so with those, let's start with the county chair's race. Catherine Harrington's been around, this is her 4th year. She served on Metro before that. It turns out, due to a variety of things, she may not be very nice to her staff. And it turns out that raised a lot of issues. And so she was basically facing Beach Pace. Hillsborough City Council, not really a footprint beyond that, except what an interesting name. Is it Pace Beach or Beach Pace? I got to tell you, Beach Pace is the only one who came to my neighborhood in Rock Creek, knocked on the door and said hi. And she was talking about things, and I love it when candidates do that, because eventually they say, well, have you thought about this? And they look at me and say, how on earth do you know about that? And I did that to her, and she said, how do you know about that? I said, well, do you follow the news about politics in Washington County? She said, yeah. Have you ever heard of a guy named Jim Moore? She said, oh yeah, that's me. Well, my house. And so she wanted to stay there and say, well, what do I need to do? I said, you're doing fine, knocking on doors, that's good. Go talk to other people. But Catherine Harrington won that pretty handily, 53-45%. So whatever the issues were, Beach Pace either wasn't well enough known, or people were comfortable with what Catherine was doing. I have to tell you, Catherine's campaign, which was quieter than I would have expected, but to me the single most effective part of it was an endorsement from the mayor of Beaverton, who basically said, look at Washington County, look at our COVID rates. We were among the best in the whole state, and Catherine was a part of that. That was a pretty powerful message. Once again, this is what's called a low information election. So what actually gets through to voters is not clear, but that to me really stood out. Then our DA's race. Remember 4 years ago we had a similar race. We were getting a new DA, whatever it was, but it was basically a law and order kind of centrist, Kevin Martin, and he was being taken on by a progressive, and this is a national movement. We've seen several of the DA races like this in Oregon, but it's happening across the country. Progressives are saying we need to look at the district attorneys because that's where some of the issues with our criminal justice system are. And so we need to look at what kind of crimes we prosecute and what kind of punishments we're looking for and all those kinds of things. And so we had that 4 years ago. We had another version of it this time. Okay, so Kevin Barton and Brian Decker, once again, not incredibly a close race there. It was fascinating to me because they have really interesting philosophical differences about what a DA ought to do, what basically criminal justice ought to be at the county level. And if you look at their voter pamphlet statements, you got into some of that, some really interesting stuff. But that's not what the race ended up being. The race ended up being each of them accusing the other one of letting criminals out on the street. We're going to come to your house and conk you over the head. And so both of them were basically saying exactly the same thing about the other. And in that case, people tend to go with the incumbent unless they have a run-in with the incumbent, and we heard several of those during the campaign. And so not really a surprise that Decker lost this race. Now, why would the progressives come to Washington County and try this? The reason they would do that is Washington County is becoming profoundly Democratic in terms of its registration numbers. And that looks like a place where a progressive ought to do well. And when we get to the state level and congressional races, progressives in the Democratic Party did very well all sorts of places. When you look at how Democrats in Washington County voted, for instance, for governor, they supported the progressive candidate over the guy, Tobias Reed, who's from Washington County. And so Washington County looks like a place to do that, but how do you do that in a nonpartisan race? You may remember our nonpartisan races for county commission and to a certain extent for metro and things 2 years ago, pretty quickly became nonpartisan. People were saying, hi, I'm a Democrat, I'm running. Hi, I'm a Republican, I'm running. And pushing that. This race didn't really put that in there. Kevin Barton tried to do that, or not Kevin Barton, Decker tried to do that. He was endorsed by the Democratic Party of Washington County, but what does that really mean? It wasn't clear. But this is the kind of race for DA I think is going to happen again, just because that's the way that the voters seem to be moving, but we haven't had candidates who've been able to take that and turn it into a progressive victory. So if I were Kevin Barton, I would be raising money continuously for the next 4 years, because you're going to have another race like this. You need to be ready. And the progressives need to figure out who's a candidate who can come in and make that basically conversation happen and get the change that the progressives want to have happen. Okay, so that was interesting. And then John Hutzler, our auditor. John's been in for several terms. John's a nice guy. I talked to the Washington County Public Affairs Forum. I talked with him before he was county auditor, when he was first running. Nice guy. Nobody can tell you what a county auditor does. And so he was taken on by somebody who said, the county auditor ought to be doing things for the people rather than for basically the programs themselves, which is, okay, that's an interesting argument, sure. I'm all for the people or versus a program, whatever does that mean? It's hard to get that conversation going. But in a case where the media actually made a difference, John, of course, put statements in the voters pamphlet that implied that he'd been endorsed by one of our local papers when it was actually a letter to the editor in one of our local papers. And when you look at it, he says he was following the rules, and he may have been following the rules, I don't know. But the quotes are fascinating because there's blah, 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 John is the greatest thing since sliced bread, name of the paper. Then there's blah, 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 John is the greatest thing since sliced bread with the name of a person. And then there's John is the greatest thing since sliced bread with the name of the paper. It's like, well, if you can differentiate between a person and a letter to the editor in a newspaper, if you can differentiate, you could have put that this was a person up on the first quote and the third quote, but you didn't do that. Once again, Washington County Public Affairs Forum, the letter to the editor that he was quoting from was from somebody who used to run Washington County Public Affairs Forum and moved from there, so it was all kind of within the family in very interesting ways. Christine Adams-Lundberg, his opponent, said, this is who you want for an auditor. You know, you want detailed work and all this kind of stuff, and it's not working. For whatever reason, it resonated with voters, and John got creamed in this race. Just absolutely got creamed in this race. So here's I think it was Christine Adams-Lundberg just pushing this idea that he was not qualified to be the auditor because of this incident, and then saying this is also what we've been seeing in other things going on out there. And as someone who teaches about how to run elections and that kind of thing, it's fascinating because whenever something happens, whenever something comes up, you may recall in 1994, actually John Frank and I talked about this in 1994, just before the gubernatorial race, accusations that John Kitzhaber smoked pot.
Oh, man.
Okay, ooh. These days it's like, yeah, so what? But 1994, oh, it's going to derail the campaign, that kind of thing. Things like that only made a difference if your opponent picks it up and does something with it. And here was the case where there was news coverage of it, okay? But then the opponent made something of it. She made it central to her campaign. That made a difference. That made a difference. Okay, so watch for this as we're going into the fall campaigns. Because, candidates are candidates. They're human beings. They're us. They've done things that they're proud of, not proud of. And how do you respond to that? But it's basically up to the opponent to make something out of it, make it central to the campaign, and try to move voters. Okay, so that was all pretty interesting. Quick look at the other Forest Grove kind of things. We've got our legislative seats. So Senate District 15 has a new person in it, Janine Solomon, who was appointed. She had no problem in terms of her race. Carolina Malmedal is going against her. You remember this Senate seat. This is a Senate seat that just, was it 3 or 2? I think it was 2 elections ago, was decided like 2 weeks later by a few votes after both the candidates spent over $1 million each. Amazing. Democrats have a 14% registration advantage in that district now. Okay? So the chances of it going to Republican are vanishingly small. Vanishingly small. House District 29. This was one you remember kind of in the late 2008-ish to kind of 2014-ish. It was a district that went from Democrat to Republican to Democrat to Republican. Democrats there, Susan McClain, the incumbent, had a 10% advantage in registration. So once again, a chance for Republican, but Susan McClain is going to have to do something that once again the Republican picks up on and pushes. It's just not going to be a very good chance for the Republicans to pick that up. This brings up one other thing that Washington County Public Affairs Forum focused on, and since you're in Washington County, you would also focus on. There was an article in one of the papers about would Republicans have a chance in Washington County ever again? Interesting article. Tended to talk to a lot of Republicans who said, yes, it will. And I looked at it, and my job is to kind of look and see what candidates say in public. So you would not believe the number of candidates who contact me and say, hi, can we have coffee? Can we talk? And it's like, no, you can't. I need your public face to speak for you. That's what I base my analysis on. And then I also look at the facts. So how many people are registered in the district? How much money are you raising? What's your advertising look like? Who are you, all that kind of stuff. So here's the reality in Washington County about Republicans coming back. Remember, 20 years ago, Washington County was the heart of Republican power in this state. It was the reason why the legislature was Republican when John Kitzhaber was the Democratic governor. It was where the ideas were happening. It's where Republicanism was basically poised to stop seemingly a never-ending Democratic supply of statewide office winners. Okay, so that's 20 years ago. So I looked at the last 10 years. In January 2012, there were 105,000 Democrats in Washington County. In March 2022, there are 142,000 Democrats. Okay? So what's that increase? 37,000 more. In January 2012, there were 84,000 Republicans. In March 2022, there are 76,000 Republicans. That's diminished by 8,000. Republicans are not going to be taking back Washington County. Okay? Even if this election turns into a wave election like 1994 when the Republicans swept all over the place, there just aren't enough of them left. And think about what Republican and Democrat means now, especially with the last 6 years with the Trump era, and then what does that mean as we move forward? We're not getting Republicans or Democrats who cross party lines to vote for the other party now. That was one of the secrets that John Kitzhaber had. He was getting Republicans to vote for him. You look at his policies. His policies look like moderate Republican ones from the 1960s and 70s. We're just not in that era anymore. We're just not getting that crossover anymore. Okay, so that's kind of the local stuff. Quick looking at the Oregon legislature. In the Oregon Senate, there are going to be 16 seats up. Usually there are 15, but there's one where there's an election to fulfill. Somebody got in 2 years in, and this is going to be regular election time. There's only 2 toss-up seats in all of those. One of them is just north of here, Betsy Johnson's old seat. So that will be fascinating to watch. However, even if the Republicans win both of those seats, they just get to 14. So they're not going to get the majority of 16 unless something really weird happens. In the Oregon House, 60 seats, there's actually 8 that could be toss-ups. And it could be at this point, we're waiting to see how they kind of settle it up. Maybe there's only 5 toss-ups. But this is kind of the best case for toss-ups. And as a political analyst, I love toss-ups. Almost like something to analyze, something to figure out. That's great. If the Republicans pick up all of those seats, they would only get to 26 out of 60. Okay? So the Democrats are going to hold on to both houses in the legislature. It's just how big the majority is going to be. And think of those toss-ups, and there's leaners in there as well. Leaners could go to the other side, that kind of thing. I would bet that the Democrats have a supermajority, the 60% that we call the supermajority in both houses as we go through this election. So let's go to statewide stuff. Now that was fun. Apparently we had a governor's race. If any of you were registered Republicans, you got to choose between 19 candidates. If you were registered Democrats, you got to choose between about 14 of them. Wow, that was fun. If you were unaffiliated like I am, you got to look out and say, boy, I'm glad I don't have to look at all those names. My ballot doesn't have them on there. The Democratic side, clearly, between Kotek and Reed, it was clearly progressive versus centrist. That was their entire campaigns. That's what they were talking about. And clearly, the electorate, the Democratic electorate said, we want to go to the progressive side. Reed actually won 12 counties. There tend to be central, eastern Oregon, about where you'd expect. But Kotek won some of those eastern and central counties as well. So that says to me the progressives are becoming kind of what our Democratic Party is all about. Okay, and that was not a particularly close race. One of my jobs when I'm working at Channel 2 is to call the races. That was called pretty early. If you ever watch election night, and this last one was kind of weird because the networks don't give you any time, so all the television stations were online. So I go to the Facebook feed, so we had 300 people watching us or something. It's like, woo, whatever. It's good practice for November. But when the votes are announced on election night, Multnomah County prides itself on being the first county to deliver votes. Great. So if you're looking at Portland City Council races, fantastic. If you're looking at anything that's statewide, boy, the Democrats are going to be ahead. Boy, are they going to be ahead. You need to wait for them. Okay, here comes Washington, here comes Clackamas, here comes Marion, all those other counties to come in to really see what's going on. But this one, Tina Kotek didn't win Multnomah by appreciably that much more than she won kind of everywhere else. So pretty easy to call, pretty fast on that one. Now on the Republican side, with the cast of thousands, going into that, any of the 8 of them looked like they could win this. We had some polling, but the polling was from some of their own campaigns, and don't trust it. Polling that comes from their own campaigns. And yet that polling turned out to be fairly accurate. And so Christine Drazen wins, as my colleague John Corbick, who works for DHM, which is one of the pollsters in town, as he pointed out, he beat me to it. And by beat me to it, I have every single Oregon Blue Book except for 3. So I can look up election results like they're going out of style. Christine Drazen won with the fewest number of votes of any gubernatorial candidate since 1938. Whoa. Okay. So classic thing for her is you've got to put together who all the Republicans support you. There were some pretty mean things said about each other in that Republican primary, but remember, we're also in this post-Trump era where Republicans are not going to go to vote for the Democrat. So it was probably going to be fairly easy for her to get the Republicans to come in and support her, but she's got to get immediate endorsements from the candidates that she beat and all those kinds of things. And we'll see, we saw some of them begin to happen. Bob Kiernan, who came in second place, said, yes, I will support her. You endorse her, I will support her. It's like, okay, well, Bob's always been one to hedge his bets. So we'll see how that goes. Now, here's the issue with this race. We have a third candidate, Betsy Johnson. Nobody in Oregon who has not been a Republican or Democrat has won since the 1930 gubernatorial election. In that particular election, we had Julius Meyer of Meyer and Frank. So one of the key things when you're running for these kinds of offices is, do people know who you are? Everybody knew who Julius Meyer was. Who knows who Tina Kotek is? Not that many people. If you pay attention to that big white building in Salem, you do, but outside of that, she's probably better known among Republicans as somebody to hate, rather than among Democrats and unaffiliated as, ooh, that's somebody I would pay attention to. Christine Drazen, she's relatively new in the legislature. She was the minority leader for basically one session. Nobody knows her. Betsy Johnson, same kind of thing. She is probably going to be better known in Central Oregon because that's where her dad was in the legislature and owned the lumber company that eventually was purchased by the Warm Springs to start their own business in the 1950s or 60s. So that kind of thing. But they're not very well known. They're not Julius Meyers. Julius Meyer won because there was a candidate for governor on the Republican side who everybody agreed on, and he died. And so they had a convention to pick a replacement, and the people at the convention picked a replacement, and a lot of Republicans said, we don't like the replacement. And so Julius, who had been in the mix, said, well, I'm going to stop being a Republican and run as an independent. How did he do in that 1930 election? He got well over 50% of the vote. He creamed the Republican and the Democrat, and he served 4 years. Most remarkable thing about his time, he lived at Manuka. So if you go up to the gorge, it's the conference center. It used to be owned by the Presbyterian Church. They just sold it to Manuka itself just in the past few months. He didn't like to go to Salem. So he would govern by phone, and he would have his driver drive papers back and forth to Salem, going down in the morning and coming back in the evening. He did not run for re-election. Not his thing. Betsy Johnson is hoping that we're in a situation where people basically say a pox on both the houses of the Republicans and Democrats. What she doesn't have is name recognition. What she did in the election, the primary, and she's still doing as of 2 days ago, she's running ads, even though she wasn't on the ballot. Now, this is brilliant, and the reason it's brilliant is because we, the people, don't pay attention to politics unless it's right around election time. So she's getting her name, and more importantly, her glasses and her helicopters out there in our heads.
Yeah.
After the election, 8 o'clock election night, the ads just stopped. Although I did see a Stan Pulliam ad like 36 hours later, so whoever his media buyer was didn't put in a stop at 8 o'clock. It just kept going. And so she's still running those ads because, especially with the Clackamas count, politics is still in the air. People are paying attention to it. Now, is this going to help her going into the fall? Yes, it will. How much will it help her? We don't know. Right now, she's raised over $8 million. She's going to have about $5 million in the bank when all this is done. Her opponents basically spent down to nothing. They may have a few tens of thousands or maybe 100,000, but nothing like what you need to actually run a race. Remember, 4 years ago, this race between Newt Buehler and Kate Brown broke all records for campaign spending with up and towards $30–40 million. It was just stunning. Betsy Johnson's already shown that she can raise millions of dollars. I have no doubt that Christine Drazen, if this becomes something that the national Republicans think is doable, that she will attract similar amounts, and Tina Kotek will attract similar amounts. So we can have easily each of them with $10 million. It wouldn't surprise me to see each of them with $15 to $20 million. Okay? So you'll be hearing about this campaign as you go to the fall. Absolutely. Just in terms of voter registration, Betsy Johnson is making an interesting argument. She says a pox on both their houses, but she's beginning to say, but there are good ideas from the Republicans and good ideas from the Democrats. I want to bring those into government, give them a chance of moving on. A pox on both their houses is, there we go. A box on both their houses is on a bumper sticker. Here are the things that work from both, doesn't. It's a complex message. So we'll see how she does putting that complex message together. And remember, the world is out there as well. So she has gotten most of her support so far, money and otherwise, from Republicans who basically don't want to be on the Trump side of things. So Phil Knight's the most famous of them, but he's not the only one of them. And when you look at her stances on issues like masking and the governor's control in public health crisis, she sounds like a Republican. But when the Supreme Court leak happened about Roe v. Wade, she very proudly started running an ad and having things out in her social media saying, I support choice. Okay, so the world is coming and she's responding. The latest thing this past week is, and just in the paper this morning, she owns a submachine gun. She's an NRA person. And so the world comes in and it kind of knocks her off, and she has to say, so how am I bringing in both and making a difference here? Early polling, before she started ads and everything else, early polling showed her simply being the spoiler. 10%, maybe 15% of the vote. If we get to August, September, and we see polling that shows that she's up into the mid-20s, we got a real interesting three-way race going on here. Remember, Republicans in this state, with just a couple of exceptions, can't break through the 40 to 45%. Okay? And the reason for that is not just Multnomah County, it is Washington County now becoming profoundly Democratic in its voter registration. But remember also that just this past few months, we aren't sure when, and I'll tell you why in just a bit, unaffiliated voters surpassed Democrats as the #1 group, if you can call it a group, in the state. So if those unaffiliated are feeling more, either the Democrats have had their go for the past 30 years, and I'm tired of it, or they're saying Republicans are where we need to go, then there could be shifts that happen here. We have to wait and see if that's what's actually going on. Okay? Now, the reason we don't know when that change happened, when all of a sudden we have the unaffiliated surpass the Democrats, is when every 10 years you do a new redistricting, the Secretary of State goes offline with exactly what the monthly registration numbers are, because they're madly changing, oh, District 29 now has this boundary, these people live in it, this congressional district looks like this. So there's a number of months, usually 2, 3, or 4, when we don't have the data every month. And so the change happens sometime in there. When they came back, it's like, oh, look, it happened. The inabilities have surpassed where we are, the Democrats are. Okay, and then just to end up, we do have congressional races. Notice one thing that was missing from the primary, Donald Trump was not an issue. Think about all the other things in Ohio, in North Carolina, in Pennsylvania, all those other races, Donald Trump endorsements, all that huge thing, not an issue here at all. I don't know why, but I'm convinced that the Republicans said, Donald Trump, I saw how he did here in Oregon in the 2020 election. I don't want an endorsement from Donald Trump, because that way I will simply lose. Okay? So not an issue there. But we have a Senate race. Wow. The Senate race is Ron Biden's going to win. He's going to win by probably comfortably 55 to 60% of the vote. He's going against Jo Rae Perkins. Jo Rae Perkins took on Merkley 2 years ago. She got exactly the 40, 41, 42, 43%, whatever it is Republicans get. Her claim to fame now is she was actually in D.C. on January 6th, but she didn't really walk towards the Capitol. So it's not going to be a race. It'll be fun to watch, but not really a race. We do, however, with our new congressional district, we've got 6 congressional districts. Usually all 5 of them are snooze fests, and now 3 of them actually could be competitive. Pretty darn amazing. Suzanne Bonamici, here in the first, will not be one of those. Suzanne Bonamici's district, as it was reconstructed, basically became even more solidly Democratic. Once again, remember the good old days, 1994, when the Republican surge came through here, we had the Democratic incumbent, Elizabeth Furs, won re-election by 301 votes. Anything can happen this time. Suzanne Bonamici will probably get 60-65% of the vote. Okay, but the 6th looks pretty competitive, and that was the one that had the mystery guy, Carrick Flynn, who kept saying, I grew up in Vernonia, you should know me, and in Vernonia most people kind of did, and he wasn't paying for his campaign. He was adopted by these super PACs that came in and ran all his ads, and if you want to know how they did that, I finally figured it out. There was some recording that happened in my own kind of sleuthing, I figured out how they did that. So he's not going to be in there, but Andrea Salinas and Mike Erickson, so Democrat and Republican. Once again, we'll be able to tell if this is something that the Republicans think they can win. Does Erickson attract a whole bunch of national money? The Democrats have a 5% advantage in the district. Okay? So it could happen that attracts stuff. The 5th, which we finally figured out, I called that for Jamie McLeod-Skinner on the Democratic side a week ago. Which just took a long time, with basically 45% of all the registered voters in the Democratic Party are in Clackamas County, and they weren't counting their ballots. So it took a while to get that through. There, the Democrats have about a 6% advantage. Okay, Lori Chavez-Remmer, the Republican, fairly weak candidate, not really well known. But if the Republicans think that this is one they can flip, money is going to flow to her like it's going out of style. So we'll be able to tell this summer if these are going to really take on. And then the 4th congressional district used to be Peter DeFazio's. There, Val Hoyle, one going away on the Democratic side. Alex Starlovis on the Republican side had no competition. Scarlato's gave DeFazio a run for his life 2 years ago. The district, when it's been reconstructed, actually moved from 50-50 Democrat-Republican to an 8% advantage for Democrats. So the chances are pretty good that that's going to stay in Democratic hands. But Scarlatos is a really attractive candidate. He's the guy who fought terrorists, and it has a movie that he was in, and all that other kind of stuff. So we'll see how that works. But that's something of a miracle. In Oregon, we don't have those congressional races, and nationally, we don't have competitive races at the congressional level either. So we'll be watching that pretty carefully. Okay. There was something I was going to tell you how I figured out, but I think I already did. So that's it. Good. Let's stop there. See if you have any questions.
It was how you figured out the super PAC could fund that.
Oh, the super PAC. Yeah. So the ads for Carrot Flynn were really weird because they started Carrot Flynn. And super PAC ads are usually, here's our issue. If you have issues, you should really think about calling this person. Or you should think about carefully about, this person has rated this in our newsletter. So just think about that when you cast your ballot. But it was Carrot Flynn wandering around and say, hi, I'm Carrot Flynn. I like puppies. I like to wander around in the woods. It was like, okay, well, so it turns out when you go to the web page of the candidates, especially congressional candidates, there's always, different things. Here are my issues. Here's how to contact us. Here's how to give me money. That's usually the biggest one. But there's one that's called media. And the media ones, up until this point, the media ones have been, so here's the clippings I have of who's covered me. That's not what the media one is now. The media one is now, they call it the red box format, because oftentimes the important information is in a red box. Now, how did that? I didn't crack that one. That was a front page story on the New York Times. It was red boxes. I see them right there. Okay? And it has, this is, if you happen to want to adopt me as a super PAC and run ads, here's what would be nice for you to say. And when you look at what Carrot Flynn wrote, it was word for word what was in the ads the super PACs were running. Andrea Salinas figured this out. She didn't have red boxes, but word for word, she was also adopted by at least one big PAC. They did word for word on that. And then down at the bottom, instead of the links to here are my articles, if you want footage of me doing stuff, click here. Just in case. And so it took off. And Carrot Flynn was attracting, the latest I saw, he was getting 3 times as much independent money for his campaign as anybody in the country. And we still don't really know why. So is Carrot Flynn going to come back? Carrot Flynn needs to actually kind of flip in the district, do something, and show us that he would be a good member of Congress rather than I lived in Vernonia and was flooded and that really had a big impact on me. What else do you do, Carrot? So we'll see. But almost all the campaign you saw about him was not his campaign, except that he wrote it in the red box. And they took it and said, okay, we'll just run exactly that. And looking at those ads, I made a joke about this on the air that you actually got somebody to call in and say, what? Apparently, if you're a candidate in Oregon, you need to like children, have a dog, and love to walk through either vineyards or the woods. And if there's a playground around, that would be very nice as well. So there you go. That's how we determine who is serving in our elected offices. So yes, Dan.
We got it all.
My question is, if bipartisanship has gone the way of the horse and buggy, how is Salem or DC or our democracy ever going to move forward?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there is no good answer. Congress is going to remain broken. There's just no doubt about it, and part of it is the Senate and the 60 votes and all that kind of stuff. But it's a big, big problem. In Salem, it's going to happen if there is, and we've seen groups like this within the past 10 years, but they've gotten smaller and less powerful. There has to be some issue where, in fact, it's a centrist group that meets, that comes up with the solution.
But are there any more moderate / centrist in either party?
There are, but not on the big issues that make the media. When you look at the legislature, they agree on 80 to 85%. Things pass by 59 to 1 in the House, and they pass 30 to 0 in the Senate. It's just amazing. But on things that all of a sudden become the touchstone for this is what it means to be an R or a D, they go into their corners and they don't cross. That's where the only one who's doing that regularly was Betsy Johnson. She's now going to try to become the governor based on that. It's going to be tough because we're a Democratic state. We're a Democratic state. So, yeah.
A little out of Washington County, but there seemed to be a lot of drama in the Portland City Council race. Just your thoughts on that, and especially Joanna Hardissy's chances.
Yeah. So Dan Ryan, who was running in for the second position, I didn't think he would win that strongly, but he did, and it's because he put together a coalition. And if we dug deeper, there's no way to do it reasonably. I think it's because he's a white man that may have worked too. Because Joanne Hardissy, as a black woman, has a lot of people who are uncomfortable with that. So Joanne Hardissy's side, and she was only getting about like 37, 38% of the vote as we were looking at election night. She's now about 44% of the vote. Okay, so you got to win by 50%. So in the fall, she just has to kind of come up with 6%, and she's there. Taken on by two white guys who basically were saying, the progressive way that you have of dealing with homelessness and things like that is not working. The defund the police thing is not where we want to go. They split the vote, almost exactly split the vote. Between the two of them, they're 45% of the vote. We have a history in Portland of people who get the most votes in the primary, but not 50%, who that's as high as they go and they lose in the general. Doesn't happen often, but it happens. So Joanne Hardissy has got to be saying, okay, what are my odds? I think her odds are actually pretty good. And the reason is turnout. Now, turnout's going to end up being not as dismal as we thought it was going to be. It's going to be kind of 36, 37% is what it looks like at this point. We're going to have a turnout in the fall that's going to be at least twice that. And if this governor race takes off like we think it is, it may be higher than that. Just getting voters to come in there. That means Portland voters who are progressive Democrats are going to turn out in higher numbers. And that means Joanne Hardissy's going to have an advantage. Okay. Think of all the Portland candidates who have gotten the business community to be on their side. They don't get elected to city council. Generally. Yeah.
Jim, the last time we spoke together, we were on TV talking about the Oregon Model Bill.
Exactly.
The 50th anniversary. What part do you see the environment and energy and things taking in this election?
It's going to depend on Tina Kotek and where she wants to go. Those are, especially environment is very big in Oregon, but it's become a conversation that's taken a twist because of timber unity. Okay, and timber unity is not the power that it was when all the log trucks showed up to honk in Salem and stop bills that were already dead anyway. But in any case, but timber unity is the way a lot of Oregon thinks about environment. We want to err on the side of jobs rather than environmental protection. So Christine Drazen can speak to that, but I don't know that it's going to have legs. I don't know that it's going to have legs. Now, Betsy Johnson is also a timber unity, she's not part of it, but she's on that side of the equation. So the way environment could actually play in Tina Kotek's hands, where she has two opponents who are basically saying we need to log more. And the bulk of voters are saying, well, that's not working. And it'll be fascinating, I've done a lot of research on this. You know, the logging industry started going downhill in Oregon in 1978, before the spotted owl. It's because we finished logging all of our old growth. And the timber company said, okay, the reason we're called Louisiana Pacific is because we have forests in Louisiana, we're going to Louisiana. Okay, Georgia Pacific, we're going back to Atlanta. We'll log there and we'll see you again in 60 years or whatever, when your trees are back. We'll come back. That kind of conversation is not happening. I think it's too complex for an election, but it's a real conversation that people need to be having. I think he'll get a team to contact to really kind of push that. Yeah.
In listening to what you have to say today, it looks like gerrymandering has had a big effect on the balance of power.
Here and in the entire country, absolutely. Gerrymandering ought not to exist. How you fix it is really tough. A whole bunch of states have put in commissions, but those commissions, it turns out, most of them are really weak, and it goes back to partisan kinds of things. So there have been several proposals over the years to get a change in the way we redistrict in Oregon. One of them fell apart in 2020 because with the pandemic, they couldn't gather signatures. But so those ideas are out there, but it's really awful. In Oregon, with our redistricting, the Republican plans were worse than the Democratic plans. If you take out unaffiliated voters, we have 60% Democrats and 40% Republicans, and the Republican plans gave 50 to 55% of state legislative seats to Republicans and gave 50% of our congressional seats to Republicans. Democrats were also bad, but they were less bad than the Republicans. It was just pathetic on both sides. And so it's a huge issue. It's a huge issue. As someone who does international stuff, I want us to go become like a European country for Israel. Israel's got a great election system. There's a single country. It is a single district. You have an election, and you say, okay, here are 25 candidates. If we get 10% of the vote, our top 10 get in. I'd love to see that, because then you get third parties coming in. You don't have a Republican Party that's trying to figure out what it does. You have a social conservative Republican Party and a fiscal conservative Republican Party. You have the progressive Democrats, you've got centrist Democrats. They're all able to be more coherent and do things. Is that going to happen in the United States? No. But if I ran the world, it would.